the Juniper Research Industry Roundtable event on online payment fraud. So it's a pleasure to have you all join us. We've got a short presentation on the state of the market and a roundtable event with some experts today for you. So hopefully this will be a great session, and let's jump into it. So just a look at our agenda. So today we're going to start with some introductions. Then we're going to look at the current fraud market landscape, the key online payment fraud findings from our recent research in the space. We're also going to look at our market outlook for the market, and then we're going to move into a panel discussion. So without further ado, let's look at who our panel attendees are today. So firstly, I'll introduce myself. I'm Nick Maynard. I'm a lead analyst here at Juniper Research. I've been here for just over 4 years now, and I was the co-author of our recent online payment fraud research piece, and I write all about fintech and payments here. So it's a pleasure to be here with you today. Hopefully joining us will be Jose Palares from Experian. Hopefully he will be joining in a minute. But also we are joined by Vic Dhawan, who's the VP and Senior Product Leader at Kount, which is an Equifax company. So a pleasure to have you here today, Vic. And we're also joined by Anand Oka, who is a Partner Group Program Manager at Microsoft. So again, pleasure to have you here today, Anand. And I'm looking forward to what's going to be a great discussion on the online payment fraud space. So let's jump into it. And just a point that anyone who's attending, feel free to please drop any questions you have throughout the webinar into the chat. And when we get to the panel discussion element of this webinar, then we will answer as many of those questions as possible. So please send them in and we will address those as they come up. So looking at the current fraud landscape today, so I think what is contributing to the fraud challenge at present is that the level of data breaches is very high. We're seeing a lot of data breaches occur across channels, and really these are absolutely fueling an absolute surge of synthetic identity use. And this is a problem when so much fraud can be achieved with synthetic identity, and how important identity has become to fraud. All of this data being able to be put into these synthetic identities is a very important problem to look at. And we see there on the right, there's some examples of fraud of data breach cases that have happened in 2020. And there are some huge cases there, and a huge amount of data has been made available. This is paired with a massive surge in digital payment activity. The pandemic, as everyone can see, and everyone has been saying, has led to a digital payments revolution. E-commerce is being used much more widely. Digital payments, digital wallets are being used extensively. And we've also seen a lot of pandemic-related scams, so targeting the stimulus payments as a area of potential weakness. That has all contributed to what is quite a difficult operating environment at present. Also, what we've got new merchants to the online arena. The pandemic has meant that all merchants really need to be in the online space, and this is crucially important for them as a revenue stream. But what that means is that we've got inexperienced merchants in this online arena, and that is really quite difficult for the fraud equation. How do these companies deal with these new elements of fraud? So really what we're seeing is an increase in usage, an increase in threat vectors. Open banking APIs, again, are a new threat vector that needs to be secured. So the current fraud landscape is more dynamic and more tricky than it has ever been. So that's a real challenge. If we're then looking at the key findings of our recent research, so the key takeaways, identity we are finding is increasingly critical in the fraud space. It's becoming crucial and it's accelerating that need. And really, fundamentally, if you completely can verify somebody's identity and you know exactly who that person is, there's no possibility of fraud. So now we're seeing a lot more emphasis on digital identity verification. We really see an alignment between digital identity and fraud. And I think that's a topic we'll be discussing at length in a few minutes. AI and machine learning, this is something that again is so important to how the fraud ecosystem is working now on both sides, in terms of it's being used to massively improve fraud detection and prevention techniques, but it's also being used in some cases by the fraudsters themselves. So we've got a situation where adversarial machine learning is in place, with both sides being equipped with the similar technology. So that is a challenge and something that we're really going to see machine learning tactics need to evolve as those fraudster tactics advance. Also, what we're seeing is that the fraud is universal. Now so many different elements are online. Everything is exposed to fraud, and really no verticals are immune from it. What we've seen in the past is, as activity has shifted online, we've seen card present fraud migrate to card not present fraud. And ultimately what that proves is that the fraudsters follow the traffic. If you see that and if you realize that, then that means that as channels change, those threats are going to follow them. And that's something really important to consider going forward, particularly as new channels for potential fraud threats are emerging all the time. And we estimate that that there will be over 52 billion in e-commerce fraud losses in 2025 as the e-commerce ecosystem expands. So that's really just a demonstration of how difficult this is at present. Now, looking at our fraud market outlook, so we've mentioned that 52 billion. Physical goods purchases are going to be the largest segment for fraud losses, our report found, and that's followed by banking. We're going to see China being a major market for fraud losses, and the fraud detection and prevention programs in those markets is quite nascent. So that is a challenge and an opportunity for some vendors to work more in that space. And again, AI and machine learning is going to be so important to how this goes forward. We're going to see a lot of investment in AI from both established anti-fraud vendors and more nascent anti-fraud vendors and startups. So this is a really dynamic market, and I think we're going to see that only increase going forward. So then moving to the panel discussion element of this, that is our outlook on the market. So now what we're going to do is we're going to bring our experts into this discussion and see what they make of some of the developments in this space. So let's start with a topic that I think has been so important in the past year that really we need to discuss. Is let's start with you, Vic, from Kount. What impact have you seen from COVID-19 in the fraud space, and how would you encapsulate that for you?
Yeah, thank you, Nick. That's a great question. I think some of the points you just made earlier, they're spot on. I mean, I think the one big thing which we see due to the pandemic is it's been a bonanza for fraudsters. I mean, the opportunities for them have skyrocketed to commit fraud through the digital channels. I mean, and they had to pivot, same as the good guys. All those physical fraud or in-person fraud had to shift towards online on the digital channels. But what that has done for them, can you still hear me?
Yep.
Perfect. Yeah. So what it has done for them is it's taken the limitation of being physically present out of the equation. So now they can commit fraud from anywhere on the globe and at any organization on the globe. That has created a lot of new events, fraudulent events, which were not possible in the past because not all the services and products were offered digitally in the past before COVID-19. So it's been very busy for us and for the fraudsters, the pandemic.
Yeah, absolutely. And what are your thoughts on this topic? What impact have Microsoft seen from fraud and COVID? What has been the impact you've seen?
No, this is a very germane and timely question, obviously. First of all, I do resonate with everything that Vic said, and so those are like really astute observations. We are seeing them too. I think the bigger theme here, Nick, is the following: that so the pandemic caused a lot of pain, a lot of suffering. It led to a lot of difficulties for regular people, regular hardworking people, and the unfortunate aspect of all this is that when people are suffering, they're more vulnerable. Okay, so that is the main kind of theme of the pandemic. So I'll use some examples. For example, people are desperate for employment or some way to kind of adjoin their income. So they're more vulnerable to schemes where they're used as mules to create fake accounts, and then those fraud vectors started proliferating a lot in the last few months or almost a year. We have seen that at Microsoft too. Or for example, unemployment benefits, right? Like governments are stepping in to help people who need help, and it's very important to get that help to them. But that immediately got attacked, and as you know, billions of dollars were potentially lost, or at least temporary loss were incurred in some cases. But more importantly, it prevented the right deserving people from getting help, because now the whole system has to kind of step back and become more conservative to avoid that fraud loss. So I think that is the theme. I would say the bigger theme here is that fraudsters really exploit, unfortunately, they exploit people suffering and distress. When people are vulnerable, fraudsters actually attack more, because as people are vulnerable, they become, in some sense, their guard gets down, and that is the time when fraudsters actually make the biggest attacks. And it's tricky. I would say one of the things you mentioned earlier was identity fraud, and identity is like becoming a very big aspect of fraud protection overall. And this realization that to stop fraud later in the payment stage and things like that, you need to really protect the entire journey of the customer. But that also means that as there's more focus on identity fraud and trying to stop fraudsters early in the cycle, it potentially can put a lot of friction in front of legitimate customers too. And this balancing act is really the challenge and especially the pandemic brought this balancing act forward a lot. That every time you're putting a point of friction in front of good customers, you're hurting them. And stopping fraud is, of course, our game, but you can always stop fraud by putting up a wall, and that's not what we want to do. So it's that balancing act became much tougher in the pandemic, I would say.
Yeah, that makes sense. I think that balancing act and protecting the whole customer journey is so critical to where we are in the current fraud space. That's really interesting. Thank you for those insights. So looking at our next area, sort of following on from that question, looking specifically at e-commerce and how it has grown in the past 12 months and this real explosion we've seen in transactions. What challenges have you seen from that development, and how have you had to evolve with that? Anand, let's start with you, with Microsoft's view.
Yeah, happy to. So there are some basic kind of trends which are very obvious. Like as Vic said, there's this big conversion from card present to card not present. People are buying online things that they would go into a store to buy. Those are kind of pretty obvious, and they have to kind of factor into your fraud posture, how you protect yourself from fraud. And that was the big trend that a lot of customers, our customers, and even Microsoft ourselves, we saw that because of this big shift towards online purchases and online commerce, especially industries where they were not very used to this idea of selling online, they had to kind of scramble in order to kind of get ready for this new age of online commerce. And there were challenging moments along the way. A lot of the traditional merchants, they really kind of were caught a little bit unawares or caught a little bit flat-footed, I would say. But then, of course, they stepped up their efforts. They took in the right kind of tooling, and I think things have gotten better significantly over the last year or so. So just like that trend is one important thing, just this conversion. But there's another interesting trend that is going on, which I think, at least personally, I've seen it, in our business, also in Microsoft's own first-party business, is this trend towards microtransactions. So previously, people used to make big purchases in one bulk, right? You fill up a card, buy a bunch of things once, right? And now it's like broken up into a lot of small purchases. People buy literally $5, $2 things along the way. Like there are just the number of purchases you may make, even after you account for the growth in total dollar value, you still have like this more discretization or granularity has increased of the purchases. Now that itself is a challenge, because now that means that the number of friction points, number of touch points, everything is exploding because of that. Right? So that's like the second aspect I'm observing, that as there's an explosion in e-commerce, you have this challenge. And then the last one I would say is, I just want to throw this out there, and we can maybe talk about this if we get the time later. But there's a lot of focus on e-commerce in the sense of purchasing online. But you have to understand that there is also a post-purchase, reverse logistic aspects to commerce. Returns online, things like that, or requests for parts, maintenance. There's a lot of fraud activity happening there too. And we should not forget about that. And that also kind of spiked during the last, not just because of the pandemic, but as e-commerce grows, that the fact that you also allow reverse logistics to happen easily online has opened up another door to fraud. And that also needs to be kind of taken into account.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Vic, what are your thoughts on this topic? Do you agree with Anand's point there? What's counter you here?
Yeah, absolutely, Anand. I agree with every observation Anand mentioned there. A couple of things which I want to also add to that is, when it comes to the challenges, the two things which we have seen primarily is the challenge of adoption, and that adoption is on the merchant side and the consumer side both, and the second being scale. These are the two areas where we have seen a lot of merchants and consumers struggling. As you start talking about the whole push to direct to consumer, the supply chains got disrupted. The merchant who used to do 90% of their business in brick and mortar before, and only 10% online because they thought they have to be online to compete, but that wasn't the focus. Now that changed from 90 to 10, or 90 to 100 to 0. That's a big change for those merchants. They are big merchants I'm talking about, the top brands in the United States or globally. That was a big problem for them to scale and adopt. Their supply chains were changed completely. And I think they changed forever now. I don't think the supply chain will remain the same. And from the consumer's front, I've never thought personally that I will be ordering groceries online when I can walk 5 minutes to my grocery store and get whatever I want whenever I want. But I've done it, and I'm comfortable with it. But again, so that's the thing. And I don't know, a lot of people ask questions, well, is this permanent? Is this sustainable? Are we going to live in this world forever? I wish I had a crystal ball, but I don't. But at the end of the day, these were the areas where we found a lot of organizations struggling and learning, like from the fire hose. That's what it was. They were learning daily and adapting to those learnings and implementing it. At the end, the good news is a lot of them have successfully made the transition. They are in a much better place where they were in the beginning of 2020. And I think these are much stronger organizations now as compared to what they were before pandemic.
Yeah, that makes complete sense. And I think one of the things we've seen is that organizations have had to adapt so quickly to these changes that have transformed the e-commerce landscape. So I think it's remarkable how much change we've seen in such a short period. But I think it's really positive for the market. Going on to quite a specific area, and I know it's one that's a little bit controversial in terms of fraud and its wider use in society. But if we are talking about AI in the space, and AI is heavily used in payment fraud detection and prevention. But if we're talking about AI here, one issue that comes up very frequently is the issue of the black box, the so-called black box of an AI being not able to necessarily explain why it's made a particular decision. How do you approach AI from an organizational point of view, and what do you think of some of the elements such as black box which have have been very noisy in the market? And Vic, let's start with you on this one.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting that you raised that question, and we all hear it from the market, from some of our customers. The good news there is that AI is mainstream now. It's not a outlier when it comes to doing business. So organizations have finally started to appreciate the value of AI. The black box syndrome, I think, has more to do with how you deploy AI into the organization. Do you have the proper governance when it comes to deploying artificial intelligence into different parts of your processes? And that is something that helps ensure that the decisions made by machine, I mean, obviously decisions are made by machine, and there is always going to be, and there are philosophical debates that who makes better decision, it's machine or humans. But we are really talking about decisions are made by machine. In our case, it's detection of fraud, but we have seen over and over, and so as our customers, that machine can make more unbiased and faster decisions than humans can. And at the end of the day, when it comes to fraud, AI techniques are really effective. And if you talk about, and if you on top of that, if you add the volume which has brought in by this transformation, it's unsustainable to think about it without artificial intelligence. So yes, there is a little hesitation, and the good news is that hesitation is getting smaller and smaller by the day. That's just because of the results everybody is seeing. But at the end of the day, I think the decision-making aspect, which we as human always thought is our core responsibility, delegating that to machine is always going to be, there's going to be a little bit of going to be a discomfort around it, but we'll get over it because result speaks for itself.
Yeah, that's a great summary, I think. Anand, do you agree with that point? Is that how you see the use of AI in the space? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, actually, I do wholeheartedly agree with Vic. This is not a trend you can fight. It's like you cannot say in today's age that aeroplanes cannot have autopilots. That kind of thing. That argument, you simply cannot make. So yes, AI is here. AI is well accepted, and the reason, as Vic said, is that the sheer volume is humongous. I mean, so if we start putting human decision makers in front of this huge traffic, it's just not an economically sustainable model. I mean, so it's just not going to work. So I think that argument has long been forwarded, and we have come to a good place. But the concerns that are raised about AI are very definite and pinpointed concerns, and we cannot just ignore them, obviously. So I'm gonna put 2 points of view here, right? One is there's a concern around systemic bias. Are the decisions that are being made by these AI engines systemically doing something that is not befitting our moral compass, you know what I mean, as a society, which is a really heavy and important question. And by the way, this goes far beyond simply fraud protection. I mean, this permeates all kinds of AI that's used all over the place today, right? In digital commerce, but in lots of other applications of AI. But then the other aspect is, this is like the high level kind of top down question, and the bottom up question is that on a particular decision, can you explain why this decision, why this score or the risk probability was ranked as 90% versus on another transaction it was 10%? What is the explanation? What is the proximate kind of set of factors that you took into account? And these are actually very different questions and have to be addressed in very different ways. So first of all, the top-down question in Microsoft, we have a very strong program for gauging and understanding the the performance of all our AI models and specifically fraud models in fraud protection for any systemic bias at all. And so we actually have an independent authority, another part of the company who actually every few months they run this program where they'll actually independently test our models with their own data sets and check across various metrics. They have a very detailed scorecard, and they'll check whether we are, we are showing any systemic biases. And I'm very happy to report so far we always come through completely green. But the point is always to be vigilant, because it's a machine and the biases are creeping up unintentionally. It's not like a program bias, even if it does so. So we have to be vigilant. If at some point it even indicates such a thing, we would definitely take action to correct it. So far, it has always turned out to be in a very good place. And then, so this is the kind of way to mitigate that. And we publish these results and we make them known. The program is well understood. So if there is a question, we can answer that. And then the explanation piece, actually something that is embedded in, for example, in the product that we have, is that you actually show the explanation, give some explanation reasons, point out the most important factors that were taken into account when assessing the risk. And that works pretty well too, because it's really the machine learning is spitting out not just a risk probability, but it's spitting out a bunch of explanatory factors. And typically it actually does a very good job of satisfying a human who may come and query why did you rank this as a high probability or low probability of fraud. And the last thing I want to call out, just to resonate with what Vic said, you cannot prevent mistakes. You cannot make it zero, no mistakes. Humans make mistakes all the time. Manual reviewers make a lot of mistakes. It's well known. And there's this trend in manual review where if you really kind of put them under a lot of pressure in terms of doing too many assessments per hour, their quality of work goes down, because humans tend to start making more mistakes under stress, right? So it's incorrect to say that humans are always correct or vice versa. That's not the point. Machines make mistakes, humans make mistakes. But as long as those mistakes are genuine, unbiased mistakes, really like an assessment mistake, like you're not able to properly assess a transaction, that can be measured and controlled and so forth. So, and as Vic said, the machine learning has grown and evolved so well now that routinely they are much better than human assessors. There's no question about it, provably. But that doesn't prevent the fact that sometimes there are ambiguities where you would put it in front of human reviewers, manual reviewers, and there is a lot to be gained in that segment. So by judiciously mixing human intervention in cases of ambiguity versus machine learning based scoring in terms of like where the scores are very high or very low, you have a very good, clear understanding of fraud or not fraud. You can do a pretty good job. So I'm not too worried about that third aspect, accuracy. Accuracy is in a good shape, much better shape today than it was maybe 8, 10 years ago or 5 years ago, I would say.
Okay, that's some really interesting insights, and I think that the crux of the matter for me is that AI has become so widespread in society now. You can't uninvent AI. You can't put the genie back in the bottle in terms of what you can do with it. And I think what we will see is increasing sort of acceptance of it on a widespread basis for that reason. But really interesting stuff. So just moving on to our next question. I mentioned in the summary at the start about the increasing alignment between identity and fraud. What do you make of that development, and how do you think that's changing the fraud detection and prevention landscape? Anand, let's start with you and Microsoft's view on this.
Yeah, no, happy to. So I think I will maybe repose your question, if you don't mind, slightly differently. It's not like what is the balance between identity and fraud. It's like more like how do you understand fraud across all aspects of the customer journey, where identity is one part, commercial transactions is another part, and as I said, post-purchase, reverse logistics, there is another aspect. So it's more like, there are more things to fraud than just commercial transactions. I think that's the way the modern, viewpoint would be. And you're perfectly right that identity fraud is the area of biggest focus right now. And obviously, people are like, it's obvious, but let's state the obvious just to be sure. People are not attacking systems and doing identity fraud just for the heck of it, right? They're doing it because there's some gain by doing so, and that gain typically is either purchase fraud, payment fraud, but often there is other types of gain involved where, for example, if you're a new customer joining a high value service, they'll give you some you'll get some free stuff in the beginning, for example, or you get a free trial, or you'll get some entitlements just for coming in, as a welcome gift. So, but that's as good as money. I mean, so that's something that typically you buy, but as you come in as a first customer or a first time customer, you get it for free. Now, if you can fool the system and just come in every time as a first time customer, you're essentially going to get the entitlement for free, right, forever. So, so that's the point. People are attacking these identity systems because there is something of value behind them, and one of the biggest things behind them, obviously, the ability to come in and then later commit payment fraud. And again, how payment fraud is facilitated by identity fraud. There are so many vectors here that we won't probably have time to go through all of them, but maybe I'll give two examples. One is like creating these aged accounts. So fraud systems are very good at like detecting, if an account was created very quickly, like 1 minute ago, and then you came in and started buying a lot of expensive stuff and try to check out, the fraud systems like guard is up, and we'll kind of score it probably a little bit higher, like, as a risky. So fraudsters are obviously very clever. They have seen this many years ago that this happens, this kind of guard goes up. So they do this thing called account aging, where they'll create thousands or hundreds of thousands of accounts, fake accounts, and then they'll age them, do nothing, or do some very nominal, very, very banal activity, looks very nice. It kind of primes the fraud system to think that this is a good account. And then boom, on a holiday season day or something like that, they all attack simultaneously using bot technology, obviously. It's not done by hand. And you have this wave of attack coming in of accounts that look very nice, for 6 months or 1 year, and then suddenly they're all doing fraud, and the fraud system is overwhelmed. So trying to overwhelm the fraud system with a wave is like the reason identity fraud is done. It's not like a single account getting created and then trying to move it through the pipe of fraud. That's not the way it works. It's always a mass attack, right? Now there is another aspect to identity fraud, which is like when accounts get hijacked, as they say, or like account taken over. That happens too, and there it's a more like understandable vector where there may be things of value in that account, like you may have reward points and things like that, which could be exploited to buy something illegally or unauthorized way. Or you could just, the fraudster may just use the payment instruments on file to make a few purchases before the true owner of the account like discovers, hey, something is happening and my account is hacked, and then they come and shut it down. Or like the merchant may shut down the account too if they manage to detect the hack earlier. But that, I would say, is, at least that's my sense, that's kind of less critical of the vectors. This is that happens, but this mass attack using fraud, fake accounts created en masse and aged and then used to attack in a wave on certain like very specific points in time is really the true reason why identity fraud is happening right now, because it's massive. And as I said, like this merging of identity fraud and payment fraud is actually probably the biggest developments of the last year, I would say, because especially when we see it in the context of things like unemployment benefits, or a lot of merchants also started offering some special benefits to people, based on like their need and things like that. So as I said earlier in the beginning, fraudsters really exploit misery. You know what I mean? They are like the antenna tuned to attack when people are in distress. So we need to really be careful. The industry as a whole really owes it to our customers to really protect them from this.
Yeah, that makes sense. I think that's a really interesting sort of way of looking at the identity question. Vic, what are your thoughts here? What's Kount's perspective on the identity challenge here?
So, I mean, Anand brought some very strong points to the conversation, and I agree with them. Interestingly, the way I look at it, I mean, identity and fraud were always associated. We just didn't pay attention to it.
Yeah.
So think of it this way: when you go to a physical store to buy something or to return something, subconsciously the person who are working at the store, know that you are there physically present. Sometimes they ask you driver license, sometimes they ask you proof of identity. So they are essentially verifying who you are. And if you have been a regular customer, they know who you are. So that's the identity 101, right? But as soon as you switch to digital, it becomes a problem, and it comes to the front and center to really understand who is on the other end of the transaction. And that's been what brought identity to attention, that, oh, look, in the physical world, we were doing it subconsciously for generations without knowing it, that we are verifying who we are dealing with. But now digitally it becomes a challenge because you don't see the person you're interacting with. And then on top of that, all these data breaches, as you brought on early, have led to a lot of these identities, or our identities, being stolen by fraudsters. And that has become a big challenge. If you look at the numbers, purely by numbers, in the transactional fraud space, over 60% of fraud are associated with third-party fraud, which is perpetrated mostly using stolen identities. So this is not a consumer who is ill-intentioned in trying to commit a fraud against an organization. This is somebody who has taken over the identity or stolen the identity of an innocent consumer and then committing the fraud against it. And Anand brought some of those type of frauds: account takeovers, synthetic identities, stolen payment instruments like credit card, debit cards, account numbers. All those are just examples of how these fraudsters commit the fraud when they steal the identities of the innocent people. And that is being at a very big area of focus for us at Kount, to make sure that we can positively verify the identity through our digital identity network and the signals we are getting from the digital devices and authentication techniques we apply on those devices, to ensure that this is a legitimate transaction coming from a legitimate consumer. And then after that is being verified, we make sure that this legitimate consumer is not using the system for fraudulent purposes, or interacting with merchant with fraudulent intentions. And again, as Anand said early on, e-commerce is a complex system. It's not just buying. The post-purchase decisions have a lot to do with identifying fraud and abuse as well. So they all go into it. At the end of the day, for me, it's very hard to disjoint identity from fraud. I think they go hand in hand. They've always been. Now we are just more conscious about it.
Yeah, that makes complete sense. I think that's a really interesting way of looking at the identity challenges here. And I think what we'll see is increasing recognition of the role identity verification can play in the whole ecosystem and in securing that whole customer journey. And just on that point, we've had a question from Richard on the chat box, who's asked, do you see any advantages with implementing the immutable blockchain technology on the back end for onboarding in order to track and trace each transaction made from inception? So really around the use of blockchain for recording onboarding and securing that process. What are your thoughts on that? Anand, do you want to give us an opinion there?
No, it's a really interesting question. Yeah, I just saw that. I'm kind of on the fence on this right now. I don't see, frankly, if you ask me just now, I don't see a good, strong application of blockchain in fraud. And I'll tell you why. I'm not going to say it's not applicable at all, because that won't be true. But the immutability aspect of it, like, you're logging all the information of the transactions into an immutable store that nobody can tamper with. that property by itself is not really helping us solve fraud. You know what I mean? Our problem primarily here is not the lack of, or it's not mutability. It's not somebody tampering. Like fraudsters are not attacking our systems, hopefully, to tamper with our records, right? So that's not where the problem is. The problem is really, as you said, there are fake identities. They come in fake, and if they are let in and they do a bunch of activity, you can log all that activity, make it immutable. Nobody can ever deny that happened. But so what? I'm saying you still were not able to stop because the fraudsters they kind of come in and fool the system and kind of get in and do a bunch of activity, and that part is not going to be really affected whether you use blockchain or any other backend storage technology or store technology. So that's the thing I would say. The other aspect I would call where blockchain technology may be more applicable is, especially on payment side, right? If you want to just track payments information, and it could be more important for banks actually to kind of have a provable record of payment transactions, especially as we go into open banking. That's where the immutable aspect of blockchains, and that the thing that once something is done, it's done, and it's there for history. Nobody can ever dispute it. That part becomes more important for banking systems, and where proving that this happened is more important. But I'm kind of unsure whether that has much impact on detecting and stopping fraud per se. It seems like a tangential technology for fraud.
Yeah, that's interesting. I can definitely see the argument there. Vic, any thoughts? Do you agree with Anand there, or any other thoughts?
I think Anand said it very well. I agree with his thoughts. I don't even have full understanding of where the audience is going with this question. I mean, so I can't comment to be too specific, but I think I would agree with Anand that blockchain is not the solution for every problem.
Okay, so we've talked a lot about different aspects of what's happening in fraud, what we make of particular trends. Next, let's just have a look at, let's get our future view out. Let's get our crystal balls out, and let's see, in 5 years, what do you think is going to change in online payment fraud? Where is this market heading, and what are we really going to be talking about a lot then that we aren't now? What's going to change there, and what does the fraud detection and prevention platform need to look like to deal with what we're going to see? And that it's a very open question, but hopefully we will have some great discussion on this. So, Vic, do you want to start with Kount's view on where are we going? Where are we headed?
I think, you gave me the crystal ball, so God help you now. And I'll make wild predictions. I'm known for. But let's just be real here for a second before we get to the wild prediction. I don't see much changing in the next 5 years. I think the changes we have seen in last year are probably the fastest and the most radical changes we have seen in past 20 years and next 10 years. So we will just continue to evolve this digital transformation. Organizations like Kount, Microsoft, and our partners and our customers will continue to remove the kinks in these systems which are very new. I mean, we don't even know all of our systems are capable of, let alone our customers, right? I mean, they're very powerful technologies we are putting in place to solve these problems of this new future. So what I see is in next 5 years, we'll continue to get better at it. We'll continue to get better at e-commerce. We'll continue to get better on these digital channels. Buyer experience will improve, sellers experience will improve, and the service of providers, quality of service will improve dramatically. So that's what I see in 5 years. But if you ask me, as I said, I promised you I'm going to give you my wild prediction there. I think AI has a huge role to play in future And what I mean by that is not just fraud prevention or supply chain optimization or inventory management or understanding the customer. I think fraud AI has the capacity to get to a point to get you the stuff you need before you even asking for it.
Mm.
And get that stuff to you at the right place at the right time. And that's the only way you will get the goods and services delivered to you. So every time somebody is trying to fraudulently ask for the stuff, AI would say, no, I don't think you should be asking for it because I know what you need. And you will get it when you need it, where you need it. So the pull is where the problem of fraud is when I'm making the purchase. So Amazon has experimented it, and you probably all know that, the easy button. And then there are a couple of other organizations who are experimenting. I think the AI will get to a place where you will be subscribing everything. And when you subscribe everything, there is a less opportunity for a unexpected order, an unexpected purchase. There is a clear trust and expectation set by the consumer and the service provider. I mean, in content, we see it already. I mean, if you look at Netflix accounts, if you look at Amazon Prime, all these content delivery platforms already know what you want, right? So imagine that getting into e-commerce. And that's where I think it probably won't happen in the next 5 years, but 15 years, it might.
Really, really interesting stuff there. I think that's we're really starting to see that in content, as you say. So if we apply that level of AI to e-commerce, then yeah, there are some really interesting developments there ahead for sure.
And the disclaimer was it's a wild prediction, so don't count me in 5 years, probably 15.
Well, I'm setting a calendar invite, Vic, and in 5 years I'll be asking you. But Anand, what do you think? Where are we going?
I'm going to take my inspiration from Vic. Well said, Vic. I love that, by the way. So I'm going to just do the same. I'll talk something sense first, and then I'll make some dramatic, oracle-ish predictions, which are most likely going to be wrong. And then I'll slightly diverge from Vic on some point. We have to disagree on something, right, Vic? So I'll make a little statement where I disagree with you, but let's keep that for the last. So I really agree with Vic that we already underwent a huge transformation. I mean, say, guys, come on. This last year was the most transformational I have seen in my whole life. And I'm not looking forward to another year like this anytime soon, because it was just crazy. Everything changed in the last 18 months to one year to 18 months. So as Vic said, all the big motions already happened. Now it's sustenance for the next few years, like the merging of identity plus payments plus post-purchase. All those things are coming together. It already has. Now we just sort of sustain, iron out the kinks. And as I said, just imagine if this pandemic had happened in year 2000 or something like that, what would have happened to the world? I'm saying we would have crumbled. Like if it happened in 2020, and that's why at least there was something in place where the world could continue to function, and the wheels of commerce could keep on turning, more or less, right? But I say we must trust our good fortune on this. I say it was not really a fortunate event, but at least in this sense, its timing was at least fortunate. So that's one. The use of automation and AI, as we said, it's a done deal, but it's just going to explode even further. And the reason for that is that fraudsters are going to use automation too. They are going to use AI too. It's going to get very adversarial. Machines fighting machines, algorithms fighting algorithms. We need to watch for that. Just now, fraudsters are not that sophisticated in terms of using AI. They use automation, scripts and all that, but they don't use AI. But there's nothing preventing them from using AI too. So as they start using AI, and our AI has to it's two AI systems fighting each other, learning. It's like a game, right? Online game. And humans are just sitting on the sidelines and watching these two monsters fighting each other, like Godzilla versus whatever, right? So it's going to be a very interesting. And a little bit, I'm starting to become oracle-ish here, so please forgive me on this. And the last one, which is a little more sane prediction, is that there will be a big emphasis on customer experience going forward. I'm saying at the bottom of all this, one of the big promises of the new internet age was easy access and easy transactions, and the service comes to you and you don't go around chasing services or wander aisles aimlessly looking for that one thing. What you need comes to you, right? That is like the promise. And in some sense, the fraud protection and the protection from like adversaries, that mandate kind of gets in the way in some sense, right? Because now you have to start putting up walls in some sense, at least to some extent. And so how do you balance this protection idea versus the beautiful customer experience is going to be a challenge that will evolve out. But I think the customer experience will always have a higher order bit in everybody's thinking, because that's the reason we are here, where we are in terms of online experiences. Now comes the wild part, right? So my prediction is that the big move that is going to happen, like there was this card present to card not present. I think from there it's going to go to person not present transactions. And actually Vic referred to that, I think, in a way. But I'm going to say it in a slightly different way. It's like IoT-driven transactions, that most of the purchases you make in your life are actually about something getting over and you need to replenish it, right? Oh, bread is over, buy it, or printer paper is over, buy it, or whatever, right? Gas is over, the car, gas is getting low, you go to the gas station to fill it up. But, in this modern age with IoT and self-driving cars and whatnot, and, these drones and things like that, is going to be IoT driven. IoT is going to sense, place the order for you, bring it in. If it's a car, the car will drive itself to the gas station and fill up. Hopefully it will be a battery operated car, then there's no question of filling gas either, but that's another story. And so the point is that much of your consumption in life is actually replenishment type consumption, and all those will actually move out into IoT driven commerce. And again, you'll be sitting on the sidelines enjoying your life, drinking a pina colada, and let the machines do the job. Now, the place where I differ a little bit with Vic is actually this is heavily prone to fraud. That's my opinion, because IoT means that the fraud systems are going to try to distinguish that, hey, this IoT transaction that's coming in, is it a normal IoT transaction coming from this person's home or car or device, or is it like abnormal? And that's going to be much more difficult, because now you'll have like a proliferation of IoT devices, and your washing machine is placing orders, your house is placing orders, your car is placing orders. These are all new entities in the fraud space. So I think our fraud challenge is actually going to get worse and get more problematic, and a whole new wave of technologies has to develop to actually address this. So that's the only small kind of like place where I diverge with Vic. Not because I fundamentally disagree with him, but it's not just that it is going to be a fraud challenge. I think it's not going to be that easy to overcome this. But I agree fundamentally with him that it's going to be a subscription-driven, like machines doing your orders, and you are just like enjoying life basically, hopefully. So that's my wild prediction, and I stop there.
No, I think there's some really interesting predictions there, and I think the growth of the subscription economy has been so dramatic already. So it's really easy to see how that's going to have such a big role going forward. I'm aware we're almost at our time, but just one final question from the audience for your quick views on. So Simon Booth has just asked, what are your views on collaborative intelligence sources to improve how payment fraud is dealt with? And what are your thoughts on increasing collaboration? So really they're about the identity networks and the consortium approach that I think has become so important to the market. Just a quick word on that for us, Anand?
Yeah, I know we are short of time. So I'll say, yeah, this is actually a good point, and perhaps we should have touched upon it a bit earlier. But anyway, the good point. So idea of pooling data, pooling insights, and collaborating in the ecosystem is really a very important part of like how you face the new fraud challenges. So we already do it in our product. We have this mechanism of talking with banks on the behalf of merchants and sharing data. But then also this idea of like pooling certain kinds of intelligence across all the aspects of fraud we see worldwide, so that merchants can benefit from each other's experience and so on. So this is a very big theme, the consortium theme, right? That share and collaborate and everybody gets better. And it's a slam dunk in the case of fraud protection, because everybody does get better. We are all fighting fraudsters together. So we of course have to like stand together and help each other. There is no question about it. And doing it systematically, programmatically, systems talking to each other in real time, sharing signals is the right way to do that. Thanks.
Absolutely agreed. Vic, just a very quick answer on that as well.
Yeah, my very quick answer is look at Kount. It is a perfect example of how collaboration can help. I mean, biggest core of our platform is the Global Identity Trust Network, which is a collaborative network across thousands of merchants across the globe. And that works.
Well, you were right. That was quick. So that brings us to the end of our roundtable discussion. So firstly, I just want to thank everyone for attending. It's been a really interesting discussion from my side. I hope it has been for everyone in the audience and for Vic and Anand. All that's left for me to do is thank you guys for attending. So great thoughts from you, and I hope you'll come back soon. And if anyone has any queries, our contact details are available there on the screen if anyone has any follow-up queries after the webinar. We have recorded this, and a recording will be made available so that we can replay this as well. So all that's left for me to say is thank you very much, and we'll see you again soon.
Thank you,
Thank
Nick.
you for having us, Nick. All right. Thank you. Bye.
Well, now.
Bye-bye.